welcome to our seminar, Elena Vlad. We have the pleasure today to have a guest from Spain, Nerea Maestu Fonseca. Nerea is a PhD student of the Universidad Madrid, Complutense, and she works specifically on comets and will share with us today part of her research. I'm very much looking forward to that. And thank you for accepting to speak to us and share your ideas. I'm sure that we'll have a discussion afterwards, but feel at ease, feel at home. Very welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Thank you very much for the invitation and for letting me talk about my topic, which is always good. Thank you. So I'm gonna be presenting the main ideas of the thesis that I'm currently developing, which is on the observation and representation of comets during medieval ages. This is not a new topic in history of science. Records and registrations of comets have been really well studied. There are amazing catalogs of records of comets. But on the other hand, during medieval ages, but on the other hand, the representations of comets and how they were depicted and how they were described, it's not something that has attracted so much attention as other things, as when did it happen, when did it cross the sky. So me, as an art historian who is a little bit lurching into the field of history of science, I want to think, I want to express my ideas, I want to analyze how the representation of these comets was codified, how these records were codified into a visual projection. So as I am developing my thesis right now, what I wanted to do first is having a broad overview of what was happening. So I developed this database with the help of OpenStreetMap, which is very simple software. I'm not IT person, but it lets me see at once two things. First, the different chronological layers of different representations of comets, and also the geographical dispersion of these records. It also lets you put information about each record and a little image of it. So it helps. It's a work in progress, and it also, well, this is another kind of for later discussion, but it gives you an overview idea, but also gives you sometimes a confusing idea, because sometimes it looks like it's rather a map of how digitalization projects are spread across Europe, instead of really which areas were more important in cometary theory. So, as I was saying, the observation and representation of comets is a topic that has intertwined the history of art and science since ancient times. Comets were observed and recorded as exceptional phenomena, and from very early on they were linked to catastrophes such as earthquakes, pestilences, great winds, etc., and also royal deaths. Because of that, codes were defined, to decipher the messages they announced, depending on their appearance, location in the celestial vault, and proximity to other planets. Hence, the representation was a fundamental aspect that I will try to be analyzing today. Comets, which we now know that are found in the outer reaches of the solar system, were understood not as astronomical phenomena, but atmospheric ones during the medieval ages. Even if other theories that contradicted this idea, for example, Seneca's ideas that comets were indeed heavenly bodies, they were recorded and they were transmitted all throughout the Middle Ages. The truth is that Aristotelian theory of the exhalation remained unchallenged throughout the Middle Ages until the late 16th century. Tycho Brahe's work, which I am no expert and I'm not going to be talking about here in the presence of such an audience, his work on the comet of 1577 is usually considered to be the first to show convincingly that comets are located outside the Earth's atmosphere, even beyond the Moon and among the planets. Further research would eventually discover their orbits and nature, but we can still find expression of this medieval theory as late as the 19th century. The theory presented in Aristotelian meteorology argued that comets were in fact hot and dry exhalations that would come out of the Earth and would rise up to the higher layers of the air, where they would burn. They would burn in the upper regions of air, when they reach the sphere of fire. This combustion justified the creation of the characteristic long tails. The exhalation thus would serve as a fuel, explaining why comets faded away after a while. A second type of comet was produced when a particularly large mass of exhalation was attracted to a particular planet or star, then moving with the celestial object it accompanied, and setting and rising with it. So comets would be exhalations that will form in the upper layers of the air. Oh, it's not working, okay. Another second kind of comet could be when a very large mass of exhalation would be attracted by a star or planet, and thus justifying that it moves all throughout the celestial vault. Sí.
Here. Okay. It's this button.
Obrigada. It's better. Briefly, according to the geocentrical models, comets had to be atmospherical phenomena and non-astronomical ones, because otherwise a celestial phenomenon that would suddenly appear and disappear in the sky could not fit in the perfect and unchanging Aristotelian model. It should be noted that none of the alternative theories that was so coherent with the structured cosmic model in which they were to be inserted. Aristotle's theory successfully explained their sporadic appearance, their random trajectory, and the generation of their tails. The theory only began to fail as more observational data were collected and astronomical instruments were improved. For example, in this diagram that comes from a 15th century manuscript and represents the sublunar spheres, we find the... Ay, no funciona.
Yeah.
We find in the lower region of the earth where the animals fly, where other impressions are generated, such as thunder or lightning, and then in the upper region we see a small star, which is the stella comata, which is moving inside the air. I don't know why it's not happening.
No, it's the upper key. The upper.
Okay. Okay, also, maybe this is better. Thank you. So, how was this knowledge transmitted throughout the Middle Ages? Although it is known that... Sorry, I got confused with the pointer. Okay. Another important aspect of the theory of exhalations is that when comets regenerated, they corrupted the air around them, preventing the generation of rain and provoking winds, earthquakes that were understood as subterranean winds, and drought. So, how was this knowledge of comets received and expanded throughout the Middle Ages? It is well known that Aristotelian meteorology was not known in the medieval Christian Europe until in the half of the 13th century. However, there were other channels of transmission and transfer. Part of this thought permeated in other astronomical works that did have a wide repercussion in the centuries of the early Middle Ages, such as Aratos de Solo's Prognostications, which talks very briefly about comets, or especially Pliny the Elder's Natural History, which in his second book he explains Aristotle's theory, even though he does not follow him completely, and he gives a very important list of 11 kinds of comets that will have a later iconographical representation tradition. So, for example, the cometa Lampadia will have the shape of a lamp, or the cometa Hiphias meaning a knife or sword in Greek, would have the shape of a sword, of a The same with other ones, for example, Pogonias, which means beard. So that means that that comet will have the shape of a very big male beard going through the sky. This knowledge was retained and was transferred and is displayed in manuscripts of early Christian writers like Isidore of Seville, Bede, and Gregory of Tours, who interpreted this information in a Christian key during late antiquity. We're going to see some examples. So, for example, this is a very early representation of a comet that we find in Isidore of Seville's etymologies. And as comet from cometes, Greek, means hair, we can only suppose that when we are going to be representing a comet, we are going to be representing it as a lock of hair that is flowing in the air, as Isidore of Seville says that. However, where do we find this representation of a comet? It is in the etymologies, but if we compare it to the rest of the text, we find that it is included between a pure atmospherical phenomenon chapter next to thunder or next to the lightnings. Another example, I don't know why it sometimes happens and it sometimes does not. Okay, another later example, this time from the 12th century, that is preserved in the Bodleian Library, contains a copy of a treatise called Opusculum de Ratione Spere, which is an 11th century version of the Roman poet Hyginus Poetica Astronomica. The comet is here represented as a very normal star with a lot of stars, hairs, with lot of rays. It has nothing to do, it does not have a tail, it does not have any feature that identifies it as a comet. And again, the information about comets, which is mixing both Isidore's and Hyginus information, is found next to other atmospherical phenomena like this wheel of winds and the explanation of the formation of the rainbow. However, even if comets were believed to be atmospherical phenomena, we do find them in astronomical treatises. For example, this manuscript that for me is very special, I like it really much. It is a manuscript that was created in 1056 in the monastery of Santa Maria de Ripoll, and it combines many astronomical treatises. And suddenly, when the author is talking about the fabula of Hyginus, about the formation of different constellations, we find an interpolation of a comet here. Like, what is doing it here? I do have an idea now, but this has an explanation, because if we go back to Isidore's De Natura Rerum, we see that he talks about comets right after he has described the star Sirius, the dog star, the brightest star in the night sky. So when this scribe is describing the constellation of Canis Major or Minor, I don't really know right now, and is describing the star Sirius, next to it, because he remembers about Isidore's De Natura Rerum, he includes the comet here. And how does he depict it? It's not a comet with a tail, it's not a comet, it's a very big star. It's a circle with a face inside and some rays that come out of it. And this, where does it come from? It comes from Pliny. When Pliny describes some kinds of comets, he describes one of them, which is the Candidus cometes of Jupiter, which has a face inside of it and is rounded and has a lot of rays. So right now we don't have nothing to do with Pliny here, but we are finding some information here. Again, we can find comets in astronomical context in the work of Gregory of Tours. This work that is called the Cursus Stellarium Ratio is actually a treatise that was devised as something to help monks to fix the hours of night prayers. So there's a full description of constellations, even though he does not give the mythological name because he's against all this paganism back in the 6th century. But between these constellations, he gives an unusual attention to comets. And in manuscripts of his work that was copied until late 15th century, like this example, for example, we find very schematic representations of comets. Also, Gregory of Tours gives some historical records of comets. For example, he says that he has seen one, and he also cites another comet that was seen during I don't want to mix the name, the reign of the king Sigebert in 1577. In one manuscript in particular, also from Gregory of Tours, the Cursus Stellarium Ratio, we see that the comet has not been represented once but 3 times. So it is represented 3 times. They go two times when, according to the text of Gregory of Tours, where he is describing the comet, here as a very big star with a very small tail, here as a very big star with a way bigger tail, but also an arrow that is pointing towards where it's moving. And lately, in a constellation that is unnamed, one of the stars has a long tail that identifies it as a comet. The constellation is not named. It is only said that it rises in May, but it has something to do with some versions of the fabula of the Pleiades. In general, these early medieval authors view comets as something understandable from natural philosophy and condemned those who interpreted it as objects of superstitions. They explain them largely following Pliny and accept that they are signs of political change, storms, and plague, although they do not exclude that on exceptional occasions they might be heralds of divine design. The observational records of comets during early medieval centuries were scarce, but we can find registers of this phenomenon in historical chronicles. For it to be included in historical records, it normally had to be related to a major event, such as the death of a king or a prince in the same year, or a pestilence. That is the case of the famous anecdote of the comets that was seen in the year 837 during the reign of Louis the Pious, and that was supposedly a herald for the death of his son Pippin and the division of his empire. So we find this record, for example, in the annals of the king of Navarra, and also in a very later copy we find the depiction of these passages. So we have an astronomer that is looking up to the sky from a tower, and he's seeing the comet that is inside between the two columns of text. So he's in the tower doing his astronomer things, looking at the comet, and then he goes down the tower and he talks to the king, Louis the Pious, and he tells about the meaning of the comet. But apart from historical chronicles, in most cases, early medieval registers give information like the date in which they appeared, the hour in the night, and for how long it was visible. Nothing else. It was very simple. So, for example, in this example from a 9th century Carolingian manuscript, we see a gloss that tells us that a comet appeared in the calendars of May of the year 884, and that was visible for 20 days. But if we are lucky, we may even get some descriptions of the location of the comets in the celestial vault, like in this other record from the same manuscript that tells us that year, on the 5th day of May, a star appeared around the north side of the circle, emitting a great ray toward the south, a very long spear between Leo and Gemini across the zodiac, and it was visible like this for about 23 days. We are going to move further in time right now, and we are going to see how how the reception of Greek and Arabic text on comets changed really the way the comets were observed during late medieval ages. 1 second. Thanks to the Arabo-Latin translation movement that took place from the second half of the 12th century and during the 13th century, long forgotten works of displaying comets and that had been translated and commentated in the Islamic world made their way back to medieval Christian Western Europe. In the first place, we already talked about Aristotelian meteorology that was translated around 1140 in Toledo by Gerardus de Cremona. but we also find texts on comets in three very important works that I'm going to be discussing very briefly, which are in the Quadripartitum, in the Gentiloquium, and in the Cometis. First, returning to the Gentiloquium. As Ptolemy considered comets to be an atmospherical phenomenon, he excludes them from the Almagest. He does describe them, inserting them in a pure astrological context in the Tetrabiblos, in the 9th chapter of the 2nd book. If Aristotle said that comets foretold wind and drought, it is in Ptolemy where we found the first written affirmation in a scientific treatise that the catastrophic events that they herald can be interpreted by looking at their color and trajectory. Depending on the color they saw, they are of a nature of a certain planet. So, for example, if they are black, they belong to Saturn's nature. If they are white, they belong to Jupiter. If they are red, they belong to Mars, etc., etc. So also it is important that Ptolemy says that when observing a comet, it is important to know three aspects. First, in which part of the celestial bolt did its head or coma appear, and along which constellations is the movement is the comet moving through, because depending on the zodiac sign that it appears, they will cause different effects. Second, where is the tail pointing towards, because the region under where the tail is pointing will be the most affected. And third, for how long it stayed visible in the sky, because the longer the comet is visible, the longer its effects will prevail. These three questions are very simple, are the three questions that later Latin treatises would try to answer when interpreting a comet. But the test that was used the most by writers that were thinking about comets during late medieval ages was the Gentiloquium. The Gentiloquium is a collection of 100 astrological aphorisms that was attributed to Ptolemy in every language and in every manuscript throughout the Middle Ages, but it is now thought to be 10th century Arabic forgery, so it is not a real work by Ptolemy. However, it was the most used when talking about comets, because the two last aphorisms, the aphorism number 99 and 10th, repeat the information given by Aristotle and Ptolemy, but they give new details. It is progressively getting more detail. For example, it says that if they appear in the corner of a kingdom, its king will die, or if a traitor will arrive from the direction of the comma, is facing towards, then a traitor will come from that direction. It is clear that it comes from the Arabic tradition, because it gives the Persian name for comets, which is al-Neasid, which comes from al-Naisak, which means spears, from Arabic. And it says there are 11 types, the same in number that Pliny also said. In many manuscripts of the Gentiloquium, like an annex, like the latest chapter, we find a very short treatise on comets that is called the Cometis, or the Noven Cometa, which is a very brief description of 9 types of comets with the effects that they will cause on the Earth. This text ultimately derives from Hephaestus of Thebes' Apostolemaica, which was an astronomer very influenced by Ptolemy, that wrote in Egypt's 5th century. But it also, apart from inheriting this knowledge from Ptolemy, it describes the shapes and the effects described by Ptolemy also, so it's mixing both traditions. It gives the names, and it gives a very short description of their effects. So, for example, the cometa is called Nigra, is the last of the comets. It says it's black, so it has to be of Saturn's nature, and it means obviously great death and desolation in the world. It's always very happy, very to look at this text. So, with all the knowledge that was received throughout with these treatises, scholars from the medieval, Latin, Christian, Western milieu produced their own treatises on comets. Some of them only mention them, Some of them make short judgments of them, and some of them make long treatises on comets. I'm not going to be talking about all of them. This is only a selection, obviously. I am only going to be talking about 3 of them: the Liber de significatione cometarum, the treatises by Aegidius of Lessins, and very briefly about Pierre de Limoges. The Liber de significatione cometarum, which is actually like the core of my thesis, it's a treatise on comets that was written around the year 1238 in the eastern part of the Iberian Peninsula. It was first thought to be an original Latin work, but now it is more believed to be a translation from an Arabic work. I don't want to. It is divided in 16 chapters, and it gives us a lot of information from comets, because it draws information from very different sources, from both Greek and both Arabic. In some surviving manuscripts with the Latin text, we see that the Latin text included really schematical representations of comets. Like this. I haven't been able to, like, for example, we can see in this copy of the treatises that was written in England in the 14th century, and it is preserved in the Pembroke College Library in Cambridge, but I haven't been able to see it. I have asked for the pictures, but they don't arrive. They are not good, never. But we'll see how it goes. As I said, the Liber de significatione cometarum heavily draws from previous Islamic materials, especially from a short treatise on comets called the Makala Dawayf al-Dawait. The Makala al-Dawat al-Dawayf, which was also falsely ascribed to Ptolemy, and that also derives from Hephaestus of Thebes' Apostolemaica. It is preserved in several manuscripts, usually in astronomical compilations, as occurs in the chapter on comets of the Kitab Garaib al-Funun, or Book of Curiosities of the Marvels for the Eyes, which is an astronomical work written in Fatimid Cairo around 1020, 1050, and of which we preserve an illuminated copy dated around the year 1200. So it also presents very schematical representations of comets that I assume are in somehow related to the Liber de significatione cometarum manuscript. Also, the Liber de significatione cometarum was quite successful during the late Middle Ages, and it was translated into various vernacular languages. It was particularly successful in the southern Germany milieu, where its German translation was copied in various beautiful illuminated manuscripts. The author of these images gave particular relevance to 2 chapters of the treatise. Namely, the first of them is the one that talks about the meaning of the comet depending on the zodiacal sign they appear. So, for example, we see here that the text from the Liber de significatione cometarum is in the bottom half, or even here it has adopted a secondary position, and the iconographical display has outgrown its original position, and it has now a protagonistic role. So, for example, when we read about the effects of the comet when they appear in the sign of Aquarius, we read some things like, for example, when a comet appeared in the sign of Aquarius, it saw that a king would die in the eastern part, and someone would rise up who would claim that kingdom, and there will be great mortality among men and wars in the western part, and this will last for a very long time. And the air will be thick, dark, with many bolts and lightnings, and from the corruption of the air many people will die, and birds and fish will fail, and there will be a great abundance of bread. This last sentence about the bread I don't really understand, but let's leave it like that. This kind of unsettling comet is accompanied by the image of a zodiacal sign inside a wheel. So we have the zodiacal sign, for example, this is Piscis. A young cleric pointing towards the comet, also with a with a label where he is heralding the news that the comet will bring. And in the third place, the comet itself. It appears as a pinkish sphere with a nailed hilt, which is the comet's head, from which two sword blades emerge, possibly, who knows, alluding to the two tails, that one of dust and one of gas, which a direct observation of the comet allows us to see. The shape of a sword connects with that of the comet Miles from the Cometis text, and also with the comet's Hiphias from Pliny. It is curious that the text here, it does not mention anything about the shape or the color of the comet, only in which sign and it appears and its effects. It appears that the painter decided to depict the different kinds of comets attributed to Ptolemy that we can find not here but in the next chapter of the Liber de significatione cometarum. So he is uniting both chapters into the same one. In the next chapter, which talks about the meaning of the comet depending in which triplicity it shows, we see a similar iconographical display. For example, if the comet appears in the triplicity of Earth, which is the three signs that are related to the element of Earth, meaning Taurus, Capricornus, and Virgo, there will be different effects. So it says, if it appears there, it shows that there will be a scarcity of bread, and now they don't have bread, and the earth will dry up, and dry illnesses will occur to people, such as scabies and itching and the like. And there will be mortality in cattle and other animals, and the orders and legal men, and the wood will be burned, and the usefulness of mines will cease, and the cultivation of the earth and plants will fail. I would say that this is very specific, but in actuality, all the meanings of the comments, depending on the triplicity, are always very similar. The drawings in this case show a fiery comet with multiple rays, with its head pointing towards the three signs of Earth, which are displayed in three intertwined wheels, also here. In the case of the triplicity of Aries, this one here, meaning Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, the image directly identifies the comet with one named Cornu, which is one of the comets that is talked about in the Cometis text. Various copies of this translation were preserved, as we were copied in similar contexts. They were copied most of all in an universitary contexts, most of them, as I said before, in Germany, like the copies that we have that come from Darmstadt, Salzburg, and Freiburg. Also, the importance of the Liber de significatione cometarum is twofold. First of all, this treatise, that is quite long for normal medieval treatises on comets, it gives the basic structure for later medieval treatises, from which from now on they will all be organized in the same conception. First, there will be an explanation of the nature of comets, then an explanation of its causes, then an explanation of its effects, and then an explanation of its meaning depending on their shape, specific location on the celestial balls and direction. And finally, a recount of historical comets, which in some sense it approves what has been said before in the treatises. We've said this, and this is proven because there are historical comets that also heralded these events. Likewise, it shows how the new knowledge received led to the emergence of a new way of looking, and hence an interest in recording the trajectories and position of comets more accurately. This can be exemplified with a quotation from Ali Aben Rayel, which is found in the chapter 16 of the Liber de significatione cometarum, which refers to the Arab an astronomer's sighting of a comet on April 13th of the year 1006. It gives us all the planetary positions at the time it appeared and where it was exactly located. Affirmation this affirmation of Halley, who is being quoted here, was Halley, also this is all corroborated by the fact that Halley itself says that this is true because he saw it with his own eyes. So the change of observation from a very small record to a very detailed one. It is frequent that many of these treatises were motivated by the passing of a particular comet. Obviously, the appearances of Halley's comet are very well recorded, but so are especially bright comets, as the case of the comet of the year 1264. This year, a comet was seen all over Europe and was registered by many. Its passing coincided with the death of the Pope Urban IV, which led to many kinds of interpretations. Wondering what it meant, several scholars such as Roger Bacon, Robert Worcester, or Gerardus Feltrensis in his Summa de Astris made short judgments on it. One of them was the Dominican friar Aegidius of Lecinia, who starts his long treatise called De Scientia Motu et Significatione Cometarum, explaining that he wrote it as a direct result of the general consternation that the comet of 1264 provoked. He said that he wrote it because I have heard many people say that they were astonished by the appearance of a certain star with a tail or hair that appeared in the kingdom of France in the east before dawn from 3rd calendars of August, that means 13th of July, to 5th nonas of October, meaning October the 3rd, in the year of our Lord 1264. Because many people asked him to do it, he wrote it. Among the many sources he used for this long treatise, divided in 10 chapters, the most used was our previously cited Liber de Significatione Cometarum. So we see a direct connection. Sorry, I wanted to say something. Visually, this comet of 1264 was visually encoded in many manuscripts, not in many manuscripts, but in some manuscripts. One of the most beautiful of them is this one, that is the Nuova Cronica by Giovanni Villani, which is an Italian writing from the 14th century, in whose chronicle we find different records of comets, and the most detailed one is the one of the comet of 1264, in which we see a group of scholars, we can assume they have books on the hand, or maybe students, we don't really know, that are looking to the night sky, where we see several stars, several white stars, and among them there's a red and bright star that is supposed to be the comet. During the second half of the 15th century, we observe an increasing interest in this kind of materials on comets, possibly prompted by the appearance of the bright comets of 1456, which was the Halley's comet, whose passing was overloaded with political interpolations, but also because of the comets of 1468 and 1472. Various illuminated manuscripts of comets prove this, like, for example, this French translation. Sorry? No. It had disappeared. For example, this 15th century compilation of treatises of comets, which contains 3 different treatises. In first place, it contains the Liber de Significatione Cometarum. Second place, it also contains the treatise of Aegidio de Lecini, but in third place, it opens the manuscript with a very short treatise, which is a 15th century original treatise, and what it does is it synthesizes the information from the 2 previous treatises. It erases all the mathematical complicated information, he just forgets about it, and in a very, let's say, didactical or pedagogical way, he tries to represent the comets in a more lavish way. So, for example, in this manuscript, which is held in the Vatican, the 9 kinds of comets that were described by Ptolemy are depicted with very dark blue, silver, and gold, which is supposed to be something very sumptuary. Something similar happens in this German manuscript, from the 15th century, where now we don't see very beautiful comets, but instead we see something that is supposed to be scary and horrifying, as are the same comets, but here are depicted with no little stars on their sides, but literally blood drops, and the comet that is called tenaculum, which means the tenaces, is represented as a human head skull with teeth, or here a rainbow over a bloody comet. So there are different iconographical variations of the same treatises. Again, we find something similar in Ludovico d'Angulo's work. It's called De Figura de Seu Imagine Mundi, which again, it was created after the appearance of the Halley comets in 1456. And we find again the different comets represented in different shapes, with nothing in particular. We don't really know much about these treatises. I found it quite recently, but I assume that it has some kind of success because very early on, also in the second half of the 15th century, it was already translated into French and also depicted. So we don't really know. We'll see. But also, it's not only how these texts on comets, the Cometis or the Centiloquium, were illuminated. What it also attracts my attention is how this iconography from astrological manuscripts was transferred into historical chronicles and other materials. If we go back in time, historical chronicles had been illuminated with astronomical motifs for very long. For example, here we see a legendary comet that appeared before the king Uther Pendragon, the father of the king Arthur, came to the throne. Or for example, in this other one, which is supposed to be a real comet, that we find in the chronicle of the Aragonese Napoli, we find the record of a comet that appeared just before the death of the prince Pietro d'Aragona. But how these previous astrological manuscripts on comets have its direct representation in other historical chronicles is something that I want to talk a little bit about. For example, in this, when we read the Roman Jew historian Flavius Josephus' work that is called the history of Jerusalem, we find a notice about the presages of the destruction of Jerusalem, about the signs that appear in heaven before the destruction of the city. Among them was a very big comet with the shape of a sword. That these 15th century French treatises, when they want to illuminate this concrete theme, they represent a sword, but that sword is not other than the comet Hiphias, obviously, that the comet Miles from our group of manuscripts on comets. No, this is something similar happens when we go to another historical chronicle, and we now read about the mythical foundation of Belgium, which was supposedly found by one fighter of the War of Troy that was called Babo, that somehow ended up in Belgium, as things happen. So during the War of Troy, he looked up to the sky and he saw a comet. He saw a comet that had the nature of Jupiter and was in the shape of a rose and had the face of a man inside, and it heralded the destruction of Troy. So we see here Babo with two comets in the sky. One of them has the shape of a rose and has a face inside, which is again the comet Rosa that was described in the Cometis and was described in the Liber de significatione cometarum and in many other manuscripts. So it even says that has a silver face, and now is fainted because silver tends to lose its color with time, but we can see the silver face inside a rose in the Ludovico d'Angulo's manuscript. But also, it's not only Rosa, it also derives from Pliny the Elder's, which had already described another comet with a face inside that it was pink and it had rays and it was rounded, as we had seen before in this manuscript from the 11th century. So it is the representation of the comet in Babo's story is telling us both about Rosa and about the Candidus cometis of Jupiter, having the nature of Jupiter that is been said in the text. Another interesting case, moving into the 14th century, is what we find here in a very interesting, not a historical chronicle, but a poem. It's called the Song de Pestilence, and it is a moralizing text that is supposed to advise people about the destruction of the world that is coming before the Black Death. So even though this was written way after the Black Death, it is written as it had not yet happened. That is something that is going to happen. So the author is very cheeky. And among the signs that would announce the destruction of the Black Death, there were three important things. A triple conjunction of Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter, I mean the worst that could happen, an eclipse in the sign of Leo, and the appearance of a comet. So when we find manuscripts of this story, we find a celestial diagram in which the three events are included. So we see the triple conjunction, the eclipse, and the formation of the comet here. But since this transfer between astrological context and sumptuary, lavish one is not always it is undetermined, we find something curious, like for example here the comet is being depicted in the sphere of Mars, not inside the sphere of the air or the fire. Maybe it has something to do with comets being of the nature of Mars sometimes, or maybe it is just that it's employing a scientific scheme diagram for representing a poem. This text was copied in several manuscripts from the late 15th century, and in many of them we find similar representations. But suddenly, when we go to the second half of the 15th century, we see that the same story, the same poem of the Song de Pestilence, suddenly the cosmological diagram has disappeared. And instead, what we find is a terrific scene when there's a lot of people dying on the floor. And on the heaven, we see three stars, which can be the triple conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. But one of them has a tail, so it has to be the comet. Later on, in a manuscript that comes from Genova, we see that we no longer have conjunctions, we no longer have comets or eclipses, but we have is an astronomer in the front row with an armillary sphere, and in the back we see lots of rains and tremendous thunder and lightning and destruction. And also, obviously, you can't forget about the animals dying that we always talk about in the Liber de significatione cometarum, for example. So, arriving to the beautiful poster that Luis made, we find again representations of comets inside historical chronicles, but also that also have to do with the astrological knowledge that had been in development during this time. So, in these anonymous chronicles, a French chronicle from 14th century, we get some historical political records, for example, that happened in the year 677. We find over here the record of the death of the king Charles the Bald, who is plucking out the eyes of his son, because I don't really know the story. Next to it, we see the martyrdom of the King Edmund of England. Next to it, we see here a very astonishing story in which the ghost of the King Louis II the Germanic, who had died previously in the year before, appears at night to his son Charles the Fat to announce him terrible dangers. And next to, inside this political context with very strong stories, suddenly we find the record of a comet that crossed the sky during June of 1877, which prompted and which caused great flows in the region of Saxony. So what this comet is doing is not only repeating the once and again told topic of comets being heralds of death of princes and kings. Also, it is taking into account all these scientific writings that had been in circulation at the moment. So, for example, here, so for example, the relationship between comets and, as harbingers of floods or great rains was stated in a 14th century astrometeorological treatises, for example, like the one written by Giovanni da Legnano about the comet of 1368, which is really close in time with the creation of these manuscripts. It states that when the comet appears, for example, in Aries, it would mean that there will be rains of thunder and lots of rain and lots of snow. It is also possible to find predictions of future floods in Judicia Annorum. These are astrological forecasts for a future year. For example, John of Schenden, an astrologer that was active at Merton College in Oxford, and who was famous again for having predicted the Black Death in 1348, sets out in a very detailed climatological forecast that he made for the years 1368 to 1374 how the planetary conjunctions of the years 1357 and 1365 would continue to have effects and bring a lot of period of climatic turbulence with severe consequences. Among them, there will be excessive rains, again, so the relation between the comet and the rain is clear, that will be cause flooding. In this way, although the news of the Saxon floods of 1877 probably refer to previous historical records, the visual coding presented here is novel and reflects a profound internalization of the astrometeorological assumptions in circulation that are transferred to known scientific context. I don't know if I have much time. I don't know. Okay.
Usually we use the hour to present and discuss.
Okay.
So, yeah, or
So,
using
no.
to present, but we can.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't know. But I am about to finish. So, so basically, I want to do a short summary of how during this time there were also improvements in how people observe and recorded comets. It was not only so the intentions of doing more accurate astrological judgments led to wanting to observe the comet with more precision. So, for example, when we read in Pierre de Limoges' judgment of the comet of 1299 on the year 1300, we see things like, for example, as he wanted to do a better pronostical, he used an instrument called the turquetum for making it more accurate. Even though this sentence has been contested and it is not clear that the turquetum was an observing object, it is interesting to note that the first reference of an instrument being used for observing comets. So also, at the same time that we are dealing with all these beautiful historical chronicles that are beautiful illuminated and have this allegorically meaning, we also have find at the same time, simultaneously, the first systemic observation of comets. In this sense, from the perspective of someone that studies images in sciences, the treatise, the manuscript written by Paolo del Pozzo Toscanelli, which is very famous, is very illustrating of this sense. So here, during his very long life, he had the opportunity to record 6 different comets. But what is interesting here is that the comet is no longer a monster, a dragon, or a fire of ball, but is a point in the sky that is trying to be quadriculated into the celestial vault, and is crossing across different constellations. Obviously, the development, I am not going to go further on this, but the development of cometary theory always had this, was really slow, but we find the first systematic observation of comets from the 15th century. It is, some of these, obviously, I'm not going to go into, but have more and more interest of determining the correct position of the planets, the correct position of the comets, where is it going, and also even the minutes of its movement. And in particular, it is noticeable the idea that George von Peuerbach, in his treatise on the comet of 1456, the one that has been depicted with very beautiful images that are allegorically, he says that he has tried to measure the parallaxes of the comet, but since the comet does, but somehow he didn't reach to the conclusion that he wanted to it, like, meaning that the parallax of the comet was even bigger than the moon's because it was closer. He does not really say his conclusion, but still we have the first attempt, even if it was fail, to measure the parallax of a comet. Again, we see the Torquetum in this manuscript from Petrus, book from Petrus Appianus, when he's looking at the comet of 1531, and he is taking into account that the comet's tail is always pointing away from the sun. So I'm going to be using this beautiful part of an engraving by Albert Durek, in which we find a comet associated with melancholy and Saturn to make a short conclusion, which is like the tradition of copying and illustrating comets in manuscripts responds to an evident curiosity that developed during the late medieval centuries. The interpretation of their shapes, colors, positions, and movements contributed to a better knowledge of the phenomena they were observing. From the end of the 13th century, the use of the Torquetum for astronomical observations allowed scientists such as Pierre of Limoges to arrive to mathematical, more accurate postulates. We can even trace some failed attempts to measure the parallaxes, as exemplified in Peuerbach. Consequently, the aim to produce more accurate astrological prognostications led to an involuntary question of the Aristotelian principles of cosmology. As a conclusion, even if it was a secondary subject in medieval astrology, the particular case of comets brings out an interesting scenario of how scientific knowledge was visually encoded during medieval ages, both in scientific and sumptuary milieux. And thank you very much. Sorry for the time. I completely lost track of time.
Usually we try to keep within the hour, but often we don't.
Sorry, I didn't. I really didn't know it. I'm sorry.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Questions?
Well, thank you very much. I think it was wonderful, and I think it will be a great work and contribution to sort out all this iconography. I was just wondering, especially one of the images you showed. Sometimes I've seen when they want to express a planetary influence, you can see a star with the rays coming down. So perhaps you have to be cautious, you know, to see if they're really depicting a comet, or if they're just, you know, the rays of influence coming down on the Earth. So there might be a distinction there. Sometimes it's going to be difficult to see one or the other.
Are you referring to the German translation of the?
You had at least one of them that you had here.
The triple conjunction.
This one.
No, this one is okay. That I would think it's a comet. But no, it was later. It's one of those images where you had the sky and you had 3 stars.
Oh yes, yeah, this one.
Is that the one you
About the triple conjunction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there could be a comet. Could very well be a comet, you know. Depends on what the text is saying also. But that could also represent the planetary influence, whatever it is coming down and causing that effect.
Yeah, that is very possible. Yeah. Like when planets have their rays down into like suns of Mars or Mercury or something like that.
So I would be cautious.
Yes, that is true.
With that kind of representation, it might not be a comet.
Yeah, I have to get, have to be conscious about the wishful thinking about finding comets where they are not. Yes, that is true.
But the other ones you clearly see sometimes comets which they represent dropping drops of blood and you show but then they're talking about comets and you're sure that's comets. But in that case,
yes, you're sure.
could be comet, could be simply planetary.
No, it makes sense because otherwise there will be only two planets and one doesn't refer to
But I think it's also a thing to discuss because it's a distinction that we have to be aware when we're dealing with this kind of representation.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I have a lot.
Well, I don't know if I can
just
say.
say thank you for sharing this rich wealth of images and references to texts. As Luis, I'm pretty sure that this will be a wonderful thesis. There's a lot to say about comets, and I admit that for me this is a revelation because I was not aware of this richness and diversity. I was intrigued by the many things, but one is your reference to a concept that you call codification, codification of the comets, and I suppose you were talking about the visual visualization, the way. And I wanted to know a bit more about what you think about this complex, and let me expand a little what I'm thinking about. I see that you have started by presenting a bit of theory of the comets and the different kinds, and in this theory there's a vocabulary, there's a terminology that is very evocative, that is very suggestive, with analogies to objects, swords, faces, etc. And on the other hand, you also show that treatises they're composed in a certain context, but then they have a history of being copied at different times. And so I see already a very complex situation due to these, only to these two elements that you have. On the one hand, you have a theory that suggests to you, gives you perhaps an idea how to draw a comet, so the shapes, etc., because you have these words. And on the other hand, you have also an iconographic tradition, so someone who would produce a work on comets. He has kind of double, at least, he can refer to the theory and the words used, or he can refer to previous
images.
And sometimes for a long time also. To frame this as a question, so what does this mean for codification of at what point what does it mean for this type of codification that you're talking about?
Well, I haven't really thought in depth about codification as a concept, let's say. I would say like visualizing a text is codificating that, encoding that text in a way, but it is true that there's not like mathematical say that says the text says this, so you have to represent this in this way, and there's not other possibilities. So that what you the thing that you were describing about influence coming towards theoretical descriptions being mixed with other kind of traditions is the thing that I'm trying to analyze, is how they mix, why do they prefer to represent the theory sometimes, why they do prefer to just be influenced by other things they have seen before. I'm definitely going to be thinking more in more depth about that concept. It's not only visualizing. Something that is interesting is that there's a big difference when they have seen a comet and when they have not seen a comet. It's describing something that you don't have the slightest idea of what you're seeing. So, for example, in descriptions of real comets, like this one, for example, this is more likely to what you see in the sky when you see a comet, when it's cloudy. Or, for example, in very early on, this is very famous, this is very well registered. Edwin Salter, he's describing a comet that he's seen is not. So I don't know. It doesn't look like a comet, a real comet, but when they are talking about trumpets in the sky, it is normal that they represent a 15th century trumpet instead of something that you could be actually seeing. So also, one of the ideas that I was thinking when devising this thesis is what's the difference between real comets, representations of imaginated, and comets and representation of the real thing that you are seeing, and that's where the role of observation and the accuracy of how you observe things comes into the picture, I think. Yeah.
Maybe I would add comments at this point, because one of the things I was thinking about is that, well, I have been observing comets for some time. And one of the first bright comets are rare. Usually, when I was an amateur astronomer, people said that, well, usually one bright comet for decades in average. But in recent times, there are several decades in which there were no bright comets. But I also remember that in the 1990s, there were two very bright comets, Hale-Bopp and Hyakutake, and I observed both.
Lucky.
Hyakutake, in the nights in which the comet was closer to the Earth, the tail was 70 degrees. You know, from the horizon to the zenith, 19 degrees. Now you imagine 70 degrees in the sky.
It's very high, yeah.
Only in the nights in the closest approach. So the effect of the comet was so close that it was very good. So when we analyze this material, this historical material, you need to bear in mind that sometimes strange things happen. For instance, several tails. You see several tails there. Sometimes, for instance, Hale-Bopp had two very distinct two tails of the naked eye. You can just look, and you don't need a telescope or binoculars. Yes, of course you need to analyze these objects as they are in iconography, but at the same time you need to be also careful, because looking at the observations we have done, even in recent times, sometimes comets are strange. And another thing that strikes me is that this tendency to represent the head of the comet as a star, because usually, well, there are comets that are star-like. I mean, they are very what we call condensed. There is a very bright central region, and then a kind of a diffuse cloud. They call it a diffuse cloud. But this is relatively rare. I mean, stellar, looking stellar. So maybe this was probably for representation reasons more than coming from the observations, I think.
Thank you. No, it's really interesting what you're saying. First of all, the comet with two different tails like this, I've seen comets in medieval treatises that have like two horns, like the devil. So maybe that's like a transpolis.
Actually, it is a walk that is in the cover, and you see, well, more than two tails, because
The rays.
Streaks,
Rayos.
and, of course, this is an image, long exposure image, but
But you would see that in the sky.
not exactly this.
No, not the small.
The details, but the
I
two.
remember.
Yes,
It's
the,
very nice.
the two tells perfectly.
With different colors, yeah.
Yeah, with different colors. We notice a difference.
Yeah.
So this is also another bright comet, the West, that was
Wow.
observed in the 1960s. Comet West also had several tails for several.
I will bear in mind that comets are very rare phenomenon indeed. It's not always the same.
Yes.
Yeah. And also you say that the head of the comet being a star, it probably has to do that every single treatise begins with saying a comet is a star with a tail. So it's like Stella Trinitas, Vocas. Okay. So
It's a preconception.
yeah, it is a preconception. It has to be a star, but then you look at in the sky and you don't really see a star, which makes sense in the Aristotelian theory, which is not where it's not a star. No. But thank you very much. I'm sorry I can give a better answer. I'm sorry. Okay.
I actually have, it's more for curiosity.
Mhm.
I'm actually a biologist, so I'm really out of my field here.
Well.
That poem you talked about,
Mhm.
where they talked about the conjunction of planets and the eclipse and the comet, before the Black Death, yes?
Mhm.
Did those things actually happen?
I don't know if that one for sure is checked,
Okay.
but we have registers of big conjunctions, yeah, quite well registered, yeah.
And the database which you showed at the beginning with
Mhm.
the places, is that public or is it?
No.
Okay,
It's a work in progress. It changes every day. Every day that I find something, I add it to it. I will, if I ever finish my thesis, maybe it goes public. I don't know, but yeah, it's.
that would be nice.
Yeah.
We have time. I mean, what Louis said is really interesting because it reminds us of the whole problematic of scientific illustration. I mean, not all your treatises are
Scientific,
treatises.
yeah.
That's also interesting that you distinguish different genres and you look at images in different literary genres. Then the rules may change. You know, or you have some things that are more outreach and others that are really specialized literature, and you find this in Middle Ages. But looking at these photographs, you realize that there's immediately a debate about whether this is what you see or whether this is what you produce by photographic tricks or by digital tricks. So every image is always a production and a creation by an artist or by a technician, and this is no different there. And the fact that this is a rare phenomenon, so that not everyone who produces an image has actually
A background,
seen,
yeah.
his own impression. That is something particular, but at the same time, we know that our gaze is always theory-laden, as some people use this term. So kind of prefigured by the theory of what we're seeing. So if we know that there are 9 types, we will look at the comet and we will try to fit the comet into a category. So this is like when we see snow, you ask me what color it is, and we say white, but we know that the Suomi, they have many more terms for different whites, so they see more. So you have also the connection between representation and theory. It's always there. And finally, find it wonderful that you show Duras' image is it an engraving or is it?
Yeah, it's an
not quite sure, but
Yeah, it's an
I mean,
engraving,
he
yeah.
comes in a time when artists have
Yeah.
started to use
This one.
their
Yeah.
art
Mhm.
to study optics and to study appearance and to kind of as a tool to probe the appearance or even the essence of things. So Dürer might actually be very thoughtful when he produces this. He comes from an era where where perspective has been developed and used by the painters, where aerial perspectives is used, so distance is represented by color, the change of color, and various other things. So this is, of course, a use of the artistic techniques in an entirely different way than artists used the techniques in earlier centuries. So, and this is certainly a movement that you also that sometimes refer to stylistic, but it might be more fundamental. So the centuries you embrace are, I thought, oh, this is very restricted, only from the 13th to the 16th, but actually, no, it's already very, very rich in terms of changes, what representations role in these codices. So, what is your? I mean, why did you put this image it kind of stands out from your corpus?
It is completely different. I put it in the first place because of the date, 1540. For me, as someone that works with way earlier materials, but is slowly approaching to modern times, like as I end up being there, for me it was really early. So I was working with manuscripts of the same time that were depicting this tradition, and suddenly there's a huge change. If you compare it with treatises that are being written at the same time, you don't really see that such a big change. So yeah, I think what you see what you say about naturalism and it being something atmospherical. Obviously, this is only a very small part of the engraving. It is way bigger, and the comet is not as protagonist as it is here. But it's still it catches your attention. Also, it is completely new, but it also draws for ancient tradition. You can see here the rainbow. So again, as in the first manuscript that I saw, there is that connection between atmospherical. Maybe we are seeing things in a different way, but we are understanding them as we used to. That sense hasn't been completely developed yet. Also the connection with Saturn, with the comet Saturn. So it is a very well door between the two eras that we are discussing, the Tycho Brahe's eras and the for me Liber de significatione cometarum era. But also, what did you say before about theory and representation?
Dürer, for instance, clearly is theoretically informed. Perhaps he has seen a comet, but he also knows about the theory that connects Saturn to comets.
He definitely knows.
And to rainbows.
He has to know about the tradition. It's something that it was very well. It's not. Had he seen a comet? I don't really know. Probably yes.
Who has seen a comet?
I have not.
I have seen one probably here above in the 90s.
2, 3.
I don't know. Would you do with binoculars or with a telescope? Because most of them are not very bright. But yes, but the bright comets are more spectacular, of course. Not only the naked eye, but when you use optical gates, you start to see the details, even jets and stuff like that, structures like that. It's interesting.
I've tried, I've seen like in the newspaper, there's going to be a comet visible next week. And I've woken up very early in the morning and said, let's do some experimental archaeology and let's see what they saw with the naked eye. And I have seen nothing. Twice. But so...
Yes, because sometimes these are comets that are near the...
Yeah, near the horizon.
Near the horizon, when usually they are near the sun. So
The latest ones have been below the 5 to 6 magnitude.
yes, and that was what I was going to say, that they are almost in the threshold of the visible naked eye objects. So they are almost in the limit. So and that's, of course, you need good dark sky.
Yes, obviously, that's the difference.
Far from the cities and pollution and so on. You also need another thing important to, in naked eye observations is that you need to if you are before the dawn, you can, and if the sky is dark enough, you need also 20 minutes to half an hour of adaptation of your eye to adapt to and to see fainter objects.
No screens.
No screens, no.
No screens whatsoever.
No using the Stellarium project to... Yeah.
If you go to the dark near the ocean, after 20 half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, you start to see the objects that you cannot see, that you didn't see before.
So
They are not visible after that adaptation.
I think
What
binoculares.
Opens, and then you start to see fainter objects.
Yeah. That gives another hint to direct observation, like more like it's not something sudden that you see, something that you are in a...
Sometimes you need some preparation to see more if you want to see.
Yeah, curious.
But I think that the best observing instrument is binoculars, because you have a large field, or you can use both eyes, and you have a large field, and usually comets, they have a tail, they usually spread over 1 or 2 degrees or more, so it's good to have a large field of view. To see more, to see the tail, a part of the tail.
I'm definitely looking forward for a big comet to appear, or maybe in the country. I did not see the comets. It was Nishimura comets in September or something like that.
Yes.
But I did not see. I wasn't able to see it because but me reading all this astrological literature, I started immediately like linking it to the earthquakes in Morocco, the floodings in the middle of September, the war in the east. So obviously that has something to do also when you're writing all these treatises, that you link what you see in the sky with what you already presume is going to show. Obviously.
Yes, for specialists, it's easier because they are always appearing.
Oh yes. Yeah.
I mean, you have seen many comments, you say, so do these categories make sense for you? The 9 categories of astronomy, or the 11 by...
Pliny, but it is curious because Pliny, he doesn't state a number. He just starts describing types of comets, and one of the types of comet that Pliny describes is just a comet with a hair, which is comet with a hair is comet. It's a normal comet, but then that becomes a type of comet in later literature. So it's not really. It's just a transmission of text of where I'm getting lost.
I think it's Carl Sagan in Comet. He wrote a book called Comet. I think it's concept that relates these all the categories with actual observation. So I don't remember.
There are modern categories, I'm sure.
Mhm.
There's a modern categorization of
Yes,
types.
yes.
Mhm.
He uses modern photographs and relates, if I remember well, and relates with all the categories and all the descriptions. You can do that, I think, but I don't know which it is.
But that-
I could approach, but I'm not an expert. But yes, you can.
But that would be really interesting because that brings this thesis into the present.
Sorry?
That will be really interesting because this brings this thesis into the present with
Yes.
something that is a phenomenon that you can still record, so you can still imagine what to.
What you say about the strangeness of comets, I think this is important because
Yes, I think it is
when
too.
you read this, when I read these theories about blood drops, etc., I think, wow, this is just hallucination. But this is probably simply that I have not seen the comets and things like that. Strange things have been observed properly and then described. Of course, it's difficult to, before photography, to fix what
I have never
you
seen
see.
a red comet, I must say.
Mhm.
But because another thing is that our the cells of our eye that have the perception of color are the less sensitive to light and vice versa. So when you are looking at very faint objects, usually you don't see the color. In the case of comets, very diffuse and very faint objects. But in exceptional conditions, maybe, or maybe near the suns, after the sunset, in some special conditions, also mixed with atmospheric phenomena or something like that, could introduce color. But the comets per se, I don't. Well, Luis was right because, for instance, for rainbow photographs show a difference in color, and in fact, with binoculars was very, very easy even to the naked eye, but with binoculars was even easier to have this perception of the different colors of the time. Because it was very bright.
Yeah.
Maybe with the red colors was the same. I don't know, with the red colors. But I've
see.
never seen that.
Yeah. But it's really, what Samuel said, it's really interesting right now. Like, it's not all pure imagination. It is maybe has something to do with
Yes,
with observation, with the actual phenomenon. That changes, yeah. Thank you very much for that.